Welcome back to Nocturnia. We often fear the shadows in dark alleys, the creature under the bed, the ghost in the attic. But sometimes the most profound horror does not come from the monstrous or the supernatural. It comes from being seen, truly, not as you are, but as a blank canvas onto which another person projects their deepest desires, their crushing expectations, and their terrifying obsessions. Tonight's story is about Elara and an artist named Julian, who believed he had the right, not just to capture her image, but to collect her soul, piece by piece. Elara first met Julian on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of unremarkable day that rarely sticks in one's memory. She had ducked into a small, cluttered antique shop to escape the sudden downpour, a labyrinth of forgotten objects and the thick, sweet smell of dust and old paper. In the back of the shop, amidst stacks of yellowed books and tarnished silver, was a small, cordoned-off space that served as an art studio. And there, with Julian, a man who seemed as timeless as the objects surrounding him, he was quiet, with an intensity in his eyes that felt like it could strip away layers of polite conversation and see the unvarnished truth of a person. They spoke briefly about an old, leather-bound book Elara had picked up. He was charming, his voice soft and thoughtful. As she was leaving, he said, "You have a fascinating stillness about you. I would very much like to draw you sometime." Elara smiled, offered a non-committal maybe, and walked back out into the Nocturnia street, the strange encounter already starting to fade. A week later, the first unsettling event occurred. Standing in front of her bathroom mirror, Elara felt a peculiar sense of disconnection. It was her face, of course, but something was wrong. Her eyes, which she'd always thought were her most expressive feature, seemed dull. The light within them had dimmed, as if a veil had been drawn over them. She dismissed it as fatigue, a trick of the light. But the feeling lingered, a subtle wrongness she couldn't shake. That night, she dreamt of the smell of charcoal and old paper, and the disquieting sensation of being watched, not by a person, but by a pair of hungry, analytical eyes that saw her only as line, shapes and shadows to be captured. The feeling of being watched began to bleed into her waking hour. It was a palpable presence that followed her in the street, that sat with her in quiet cafe. She'd turn, expecting to see someone, but would only find strangers going about their day, oblivious. Persistent, inexplicable chill would often creep up her spine, even on warm days. It was the same deep, penetrating cold she had felt for a moment in that dusty, antique shop. It was. Then she remembered the artist, Julian. On a whim, born of a growing unease, she found herself walking back towards that part of town, drawn by an invisible thread of dread, needing to prove to herself that her growing paranoia was just that, paranoia de Bello. Above the shop door chimed, announcing her arrival. Julian was there, just as before, standing by his easel. He looked up and gave her a slow, knowing smile. "I knew come back," he said, his voice as soft as ever. "I've been working on He gestured towards an easel that was turned away from her. A cold knot formed in Elara's stomach, working on me. I don't understand. She chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. An artist does not need a subject to be present, only the memory of them, the impression they leave behind. And you, Elara, leave a very strong impression. He turned the easel around. It was a portrait of her, rendered in breathtaking, hyper-realistic detail with charcoal. But it was only her eyes, just her eyes, floating on the page, captured with an impossible vibrancy. Big were her eyes, yet they held the light that her own reflection now seemed to lack. "What is this?" she whispered, horrified. On other easels and pinned to a large cork board, she saw more. A sketch of her hands, curled delicately around a book she didn't own, a drawing of her smile, but it was wider, more manic than her own, a styling of the curve of her neck. He had been drawing her piece by piece from his memory. He was disassembling her, collecting her parts like trophies. "I am preserving you," Julian explained, his tone patient, as if speaking to a child. "The world wears people down. It chips away at their beauty, their uniqueness. I capture the perfect version, the idealized essence, and I keep it safe here." He tapped the drawing of her eyes. "This is your true essence. The rest is just a temporary vessel." The words from the reference text echoed in her mind. Reductive, dehumanizing. He hadn't seen her at all. He had seen a collection of pleasing features, a doll to be reassembled according to his own fantasy. The feeling of violation was overwhelming, a physical nausea. You can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. This isn't me." Julian's smile faded, replaced by a look of profound disappointment. "You don't understand," he said, his voice dropping. "But Pi, it is more you than you are. I've fixed the flaws. I've captured the potential. The collection is almost complete." He gestured to a final, large, blank canvas. "I have your eyes, your smile, your hands. Paul, the beautiful, expressive Paul. All I need now to finish the masterpiece is your stillness." The final word hung in the cold, dusty air. Stillness. The word was a death sentence. He didn't just want to capture her image. He wanted her to become his imager, silent, unmoving, perfect work of art. The pretense of charm fell away, revealing the raw, possessive hunger beneath. "Pooh!" Elara backed away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The shop, which had once seemed a charming refuge, now felt like a tomb. The countless forgotten objects seemed to watch her. Silent accomplices to Julian's obsession. She turned and fled, the tinkling of the bell above the door sounding like a final, mocking laugh. She ran without looking back, but you could feel his gaze on her, cold and heavy, like the weight of a tombstone. That night, Elara didn't sleep. Every shadow in her apartment morphed into his silhouette. Every creak of the floorboards was his footstep in the hall. The horror was no longer a vague feeling. It was a certainty. He hadn't just drawn her. He had taken something from her. He had laid claim to her very being, and he believed with all his heart that she belonged to him. A fine, perfect piece for his collection. We may tell ourselves that we are in control of our own lives, that we are masters of our own being, but we are not in control of how we exist in the minds of others. And when one of those minds is obsessive, determined, and believes its fantasy is more real than reality itself, the walls of our world can begin to feel terrifyingly thin. For what is a ghost, if not a memory with a will of its own? And what is more terrifying than becoming a memory while you are still